with the ranking member of the Senate Codes Committee and a good friend, Dan Squadron. Senator Squadron would like to make a special announcement because we have some very special guests here today to view the proceedings.
Thank you to the chair, and thank you. It's always a pleasure to work on this committee with you. And among the many guests we have here are my wife, Liz Squadron, and my sons, Theodore and Humphrey Squadron, Theo and Humphrey. Their first time ever in Albany, and I would say I'm glad they're not eligible to run against me. Because I'm great. Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you, Senator. We'll be talking to them in the future, I'm sure. But thank you for your cooperation more than anything today, as we have a lengthy agenda, trying to squeeze it in between budget deliberations, and I appreciate your support and working towards the efficiencies of the committee. We appreciate that very, very much. I'd also like to welcome Senator Fred Exar for being here today. Thank you, Senator. Appreciate your participation. Without further ado, we have 65 bills on the agenda, and we'd like to begin with print number 100 by Senator Boyle.
Senator, this is an act to amend the penal law in relation to creating a presumption of intent to sell heroin.
Motion to report. Negative votes? Senator Squadron.
Just briefly, and with such a long agenda, we don't need to debate bills that we've debated before. There's prior record of conversation on this bill. Much of this bill makes sense. There's an ongoing concern that trace amounts of heroin on a fixed number of bags would create the intent to sell on its own. It could be in an addicted situation where someone is not a seller, but they have those empty bags with the trace amounts and are not sellers. That's the concern of this bill, and without rec, because the rest of it makes sense, and hope it will be amended before the floor. Thank you.
Before I call the vote, Senator Kruger has joined us. Senator, welcome. Thank you for your participation. It's a motion to report print number 100. Negative votes, Senator Kruger in the negative, Senator Squadron without recommendation. Bills passed. 113 by Senator Diaz.
Senator, this is an act to amend the penal law in relation to prohibiting stalking by technological means.
Motion to report. Negative votes. Bills reported. Without rec, Senator Kruger. 148A by Senator Squadron.
Senator, this is an act to amend the penal law and the criminal procedure law and several other sections of law in relation to offenses involving theft of identity, and to repeal such provisions as well.
Senator Squadron.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the chair's great wisdom for putting this bill on the agenda. It's well-sponsored, among other things. It's an important bill because we really do need to update identity theft statutes in the state with technology. I know Senator Golden is also working on something to work together, and the chair actually last year raised a concern about this bill that it doesn't have an explicit mechanism around attorney's fees and other expenses required to sort of clean up one's identity after it's stolen. Something we're working with the council on as this bill moves forward. So I appreciate the opportunity for it to move out of committee, and we do hope to see it on the floor, and we may very well see it with amendments along the lines of what the chair commented on last year, which we thought made a lot of sense. So thank you for that.
Senator Squadron, we appreciate you addressing this issue. It's an extremely important one, and look forward to working with you to see our laws strengthened in this regard. Motion to report 148A by Senator Squadron. Negative votes. Bills reported. 395A by Senator Galvin.
Senator, this is an act to amend the penal law in relation to the definition of mentally disabled in relation to the larceny statute.
Motion to report. Negative votes. Bills reported. 403 by Senator Galvin.
Senator, this is an act to amend the criminal procedure law in relation to peace officers.
Motion to report. Senator Squadron.
Thank you very much. This is the first of a number of peace officer bills this year, though not the first time this committee has gone through them, nor in fact the first time, if they do, that they would have passed through both houses and been seen by the governor. The governor issued a veto message a couple of years ago calling for a more comprehensive set of sort of regulations and standards for when peace officers are created. That continues to make a lot of sense to me. I want to be clear that sort of merits of each peace officer bill before us, I think could be described, but I think this is a good opportunity to vote without recommendation to make the point that what we should really be doing is a comprehensive structure on this. Again, something I know the chair has worked on in the past. I know it's not as easily done as said. However, I do think that it's worth the effort to make that happen. So I'll vote without rec on this bill. I will not repeat myself for every peace officer bill, but please refer back to these comments on the future ones. And again, if they come to the floor without that happening, then I think, as I was last year, I will end up against them, not again on the merits of any single one of the peace officer recommendations necessarily.
Thank you, Senator Squadron. Senator Krueger?
I will be no on all the peace officer bills as I continue to be, but won't explain each one as we go forward.
For the same reason?
I think for a broader set of reasons, but thank you for
And I'd like to address briefly the concerns raised that the peace officer legislation, primarily upstate, deals with individual circumstances that law enforcement's confronted with, and that things fall through the cracks. Both Senator Squadron and Senator Krueger are used to large metropolitan police force, one of the largest in the, if not, certainly the nation, if not the world. That police force is larger than many countries' armies, and it should be a protective unit. It's a highly professional unit. But there are many circumstances, and you yourselves have those variations within your police department. For instance, an issue that Senator Gallivan is trying to deal with is a situation regarding school resource officers in this particular measure. You have, in the Metropolitan Police Department, the New York City Police Department, an entire unit that costs almost $200 million a year, according to the chancellor of the education, I guess we call them chancellors, but they're the head of the school system in the city of New York, who in testimony this year before the Senate Finance Committee and the Assembly Ways and Means Committee addressed some of my questions regarding this subject. You have a huge, professional, full-time, taxpayer-funded operation, and we're not suggesting you shouldn't have that. But what we're asking is for you to look at the individual circumstances outside the city of New York and help deal with them. A comprehensive approach is wonderful, except it tends to be a no approach. Letting perfect get in the way of real public protection. So, having said what you have said, I'll say what I have said. That certainly applies to all the measures we'll have before us today regarding peace officer status. So thank you very, very much. The measure 403 is before this committee. A motion to report has been put forward. Negative votes?
Without rec.
Without rec? Senator Squadron? No. Senator Krueger?
Senator Squadron without rec.
We've been joined by Senator Savino. Thank you, Senator. Print number 423 by Senator Marcelino.
Senator, this is an act to amend the penal law in relation to including the theft of pets within the crime of grand larceny in the 4th degree.
Senator Squadron.
Thank you very much. This is one of two bills we're going to see today that essentially creates felonies out of repeat misdemeanors and does it sort of without regard to the seriousness of the misdemeanor. So, for example, unlawfully solemnizing a marriage, turnstile jumping in the context of New York City, making graffiti, these things would add up to, I apologize, I'm ahead of you. This is not that bill. I will begin back on this. This is about stealing pets. I've got no problem with it. I'm a yes. And I promise not to repeat myself in two bills when we get there.
Senator, I began to worry when you started trivializing the pet ownership. But
we can agree on pets, Senator Zelia.
Bill number 423 is before this House. Motion to report. Negative votes. Bills reported. 430 by Senator Gallivan.
Senator, this is an act to amend the penal law in relation to an intentional act or continuing course act that would cause serious physical harm to 10 or more people. It broadens the falsely reporting incident in the 1st degree statute.
Motion to report. Negative votes. Bills reported. 447 by Senator Marcelino.
Senator, this is the repeat misdemeanor amendment to the penal law Senator Marcelino creates a statute whereby 4 misdemeanors in a period of 5 years qualifies you for a E-felony.
Senator Squat.
For the record, the beginning of this argument was stated on 423 to continue. Unlawfully solemnizing a marriage, turnstile jumping in the context of New York City, making graffiti. In no instance are we talking about whether the misdemeanor for those is appropriate. What we're talking about is the fact that in a period of time you could become a felon for those acts. And I think that, one of the pieces of wisdom of having felonies with a set of consequences, and misdemeanors with a set of consequences that are really meant to not be as great for someone, is that there are some crimes that even if you commit them again and again are not felonies. A. B. It's critical that you don't talk about multiple charges out of a single incident leading to this. Obviously, multiple charges of the same wouldn't, we've discussed in the past, but multiple different A misdemeanor charges out of the same incident very well could. Felons are not good things to create. Being a felon is a bad thing to become. There are some crimes that deserve the felony. There are some that do not. This bill mixes those two. That's why I'm a no, and will continue to be. However, I have no problems with pets. Thank you.
Thank you for your clarifications. 447, motion to report. Negative votes, Senators Quadrant and Senator Kruger in the negative. 610 by motions reported. 610 by Senator Boyle.
Senator, this is an act to amend the penal law in relation to creating the crimes of unlawful dissemination of an intimate image in the first and second degrees.
Motion to report. Negative votes, bills reported. 615 by Senator Boyle.
Senator, this is an act to amend the criminal procedure law in relation to peace officers of the Fire Prevention Bureau of the town of Islip.
Motion to report.
Is that right?
Senator Kruger in the negative. Senator Squadron without recommendation. Bills reported. 641 by Senator Valesky.
Senator, this is an act to amend the penal law in relation to endangering the welfare of a vulnerable elderly person or incompetent or physically disabled person.
Motion to report. Negative votes. Bills reported. Print number 990 by Senator Ransenhofer.
Senator, this is an act to amend the alcohol beverage control law and the criminal procedure law in relation to failure to answer court fines and failure to appear.
Motion to report. Senator Squadron.
Thank you very much. This is a couple of questions about this bill. If there are 2 different violations for which it would increase the fines, can you just very briefly describe what they are? Not exactly. We're about to find out.
Senator, in the event that someone is convicted and has not paid the fine for these are low-level violations, and there's no apparatus for the courts to effectively require people to come back in. So this provides a deterrent, such that if they do not come in and pay the fines after their conviction, the fines may be increased.
For failure to appear, both for unlawful possession of alcoholic beverage or for unlawful possession of marijuana. Is that right?
That's correct. The ABC law and the penal law.
It's an interesting thing because a similar bill was debated on the floor a couple weeks ago, and I actually thought both people debating, Senator Kruger in opposition, Senator Ransenhofer in favor, made pretty compelling arguments. I ended up voting for that bill because Senator Ransenhofer, in his summation, spoke about sort of the role of community service as a penalty, and the fact that if community service was given and then was not performed, that the ability to kind of transfer that into a cash penalty made sense. This bill is actually different in a couple of key ways. It's not as targeted, it doesn't seem to me, on the community service component. It also brings in simple possession of marijuana, which, has been found in the New York City context to be particularly enforced in significantly racially disparate ways. Studies have shown that people of color and white folks use marijuana at equivalent levels, but in New York City, close to 90% or more of violations for simple possession of marijuana were made against people of color. So I actually carry a bill called the Fairness and Equity Act to fix that law, to decriminalize, and not make legal, but decriminalize the possession of small amounts of marijuana. Also do things like create a racial impact statement so that we know a little bit about the likelihood of racially disparate impact when we amend the penal law, which we've seen so dramatically and tragically and unfairly over the last decades. And so, for that reason, I think the kind of very narrow argument that Senator Ranzerhofer made in a close call a couple weeks ago doesn't hold for this bill. We shouldn't be going to the position of creating even more penalties for simple possession of marijuana. We should be decriminalizing it, not making it legal in my view, but decriminalizing it. And for that reason, on this bill, I'm a no. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Squadron. If that's the case, then the decriminalization is not part of our law. What is part of our law is that we have a court system. That court system is required to adjudicate, but when someone does not appear, they don't pay their fine, they don't adhere to their sentence, the courts have no teeth. So change the law, but don't, in effect, set up a system where the court becomes ignored. And that, to me, is what Senator Ranzerhofer is trying to reach. The court, making its adjudication, certainly has some options if that adjudication is not complied with, or penalties are not complied with. The motion is on 990 by Senator Ranzerhofer. Motion to report. Negative votes. Senator Kruger in the negative. Senator Squadron without recommendation. Excuse me. Without recommendation or against?
We'll go without recommendation.
Without recommendation.
Thank you.
1104 by Senator Klein.
Senator, this is an act to amend the penal law in relation to criminal mischief and larceny offenses committed at religious worship places and cemeteries.
Motion to report. Negative votes. Bills reported.
Negative vote, please.
That's on the time bill.
I'm sorry.
Negative vote.
On 1104.
Just raise your hands, please, because I can make sure we get it. Senator Kruger, the negative. Senator Squadron without recommendation.
Oh, no, I'm a yes.
Senator Kruger, negative on 1104 by Senator Klein. Senator Squadron without rec. 1340 by Senator Golden.
Senator, this is an act to amend the criminal procedure law and the penal law in relation to aggravated criminal conduct. This is Senator Golden's version of creating a felony when there's repeated misdemeanor conduct. 3 or more in 10 years is where Senator Golden sets the bar.
Senator Squadron.
Thank you. I'm not going to repeat myself on every similar bill, but this one is 10 years. Sorry? 3 misdemeanors over 10 years, you become a felon. That means you jump a turnstile when you're, in this state, 17 years old. You, which you shouldn't do. You are part of a group of kids who makes a small amount of graffiti somewhere, which you really shouldn't do when you're 20. And then, at 27, you perform a marriage for close friends of yours, and you're a felon. That seems, I don't know why we're searching for ways to create felons. I've spoken about it before, I don't need to belabor the point, but it is certainly a no, and it does not seem in the interest of our state to be creating felons who are not committing felony level offenses.
Senator, thank you very much. 1340 before Senator Kruger.
I was going to make pretty much the same points. Just wanted to point out the endless possibility of misdemeanors in the state. You could be a serial adulterer and end up a felon under either of these laws as well.
Thank you for your addition to that.
Thank you.
That debate. The motion is report 1340. Senator Kruger, Senator Squadron, the negative. Bills reported. 1417 by Senator Kennedy.
Senator, this is an act to amend the penal law in relation to financial exploitation of the elderly and disabled.
Motion to report. Negative votes. Bills reported. 1451A by Senator Golden.
Senator, this is an act to amend the penal law in relation to the expansion of the assault and the second-degree statute. Senator Golden would like station customer assistance maintainers, basically New York City subway workers and train workers protected by this statute.
Motion to report. Negative votes. Bills reported. 1457 by Senator Golden.
Senator, this is an act to amend the penal law in relation to increasing penalties for certain violent felonies against a police officer. Senator Golden is proposing life without parole for persistent felons that are convicted of 2 or more violent felony offenses of B felony status or higher, and then commit an aggravated assault upon a police officer, also a B felony.
Motion to report. Senator Kruger, the negative. Bills reported. 1499 by Senator Kennedy.
Senator, this is an act to amend the penal law in relation to increasing penalties for the crimes related to sexual performances by a child.
Motion to report. Negative votes. Bills reported. 1601 by Senator Bonasek.
Senator, this is an act to amend the penal law in relation to adding the Ulster County Sheriff as an additional firearms licensing officer in the County of Ulster.
Motion to report. Senator Squadron.
Briefly, so, in general, there's an argument that this is a little bit like the peace officer thing, but I have to say that according to the memo, the Ulster County Sheriff and the Ulster County Executive have both specifically requested this, have both specifically talked about a backlog, so for that reason, I'm actually going to be in favor of this bill. It seems like there are instances where when a locality has a real specific interest and the different elected officers and executive officers in the locality all speak as one, that as a legislature we should really lean heavily towards respecting that. I believe that is positive when it happens with my locality, and I believe it should happen here. So I'm a yes on this bill, but I just wanted to explain the reasoning briefly.
1601 is before the committee. Motion to report. Negative votes. Bills reported. 1974A by Senator Griffo.
Senator, this is an act to amend the penal law in relation to including employees of the Office of the Children and Family Services in the assault and the second-degree statute.
Motion to report. Senator Kruger without recommendation. Negative votes. Bills reported.
Skip 1740.
I apologize, I would yes on this and
I apologize. I had skipped over 17. Let me have a redo on this, if you'd be so kind. 1740 was the next bill on the agenda by Senator Carlucci. Motion to report.
Yes.
Senator, negative votes. Bills reported. S 1974A by Senator Griffo. Motion to report. Senator Kruger without recommendation. Bills reported. 2018 by Senator Carlucci.
Senator, this is an act to amend the penal law in relation to theft of services for use of highway, parkway, bridge, or tunnel without paying tolls.
Senator Squadron.
So, I've actually discussed this bill with Senator Carlucci in the past, and I just want to understand, having recently had to change my credit card account because of a fraud flag, or actually a lost credit card flag, and ending up with the Easy Pass account not being updated correctly. So I ended up actually on the Verrazano Bridge onto the beautiful borough of Staten Island without a valid Easy Pass. There's I believe there's an arm in that. There isn't, in fact, and so I stopped. But in a scenario where I hadn't carefully, as we noted earlier in the meeting, I have 2 young kids. Maybe they had been behaving less well than they normally do in the back seat, and I hadn't been very carefully looking at that light, and I'd gone through. Would I be committing a misdemeanor under this bill? Potentially, or?
You have to. They would have to prove intent to avoid payment for the services.
How would you prove intent from someone in a car driving through a toll lane when it says you haven't paid? How else? What other intent is there to elicit?
I would think that someone that has has an account or had previously had an account, and there clearly is some type of administrative error, that would not be an indication of intent to commit a crime. Someone who repeatedly has their license plate photoed on multiple occasions going through, has never had an account, never set up an account, I think that that can be used as intent to commit a crime.
Is repetition of the act a required component as the bill is drafted?
That is not a required
No.
component, but it is a indicia of intent to repeat certain criminal acts.
It's certainly one.
Last two lines, Senator, are saying by force, intimidation, stealth, deception, and mechanical tampering.
I mean, okay, so in what contexts would there be clear force, intimidation, stealth, deception, or mechanical tampering in the context of driving a car through an easement? If I would have driven through that arm, if I would have said, they're wrong, I don't like it, and I'd driven through that arm, that counts as force. Short of that, just in the context of car, because, you know, the thing is, this piggybacks existing statute on railroad, subway, bus, air, taxi, or other public transportation, where there's an individual as opposed to a mechanical pay mechanism. In the case of the New York City subway, you swipe. In the case of a taxi, you know, you don't get out of the taxi without paying, right? We all know that. The case of a rail, if you're on there without a ticket, you know, there's an interaction with the conductor. In the case of an Easy Pass, you're in a vehicle, you're going through, there are mechanical errors, I'm sure there are also folks. You know, counsel brought up an interesting test, which is you do the same thing repeatedly. You get a warning and then you do it, and then it's misdemeanor. I'd be open to that, but I don't think that's what we see in this proposal.
Unfortunately, Senator Squadron, that council was not able to go through every fact pattern with you, but however, I could think of 3 or 4 that you didn't think of. What about someone not having an account in the first place? That certainly was an attempt to avoid payment if that's made. It seems as though there are other situations, Dan, where you'd have obvious intent to defraud. So I think that repeated attempts is not just the only situation. I think that there would be many others. There have been toll takers who've told me that people have jammed right through the toll center without stopping. This is not with an Easy Pass situation. It's just clearly gone through. Some say I'm not paying. I mean, this happens more frequently than it should, and that's what the measure is trying to prevent.
And I understand that, and you know, I think there's a
Savino.
Sorry.
May I make a point that the sponsor is reacting to the toll collection mechanism that he's probably most used to dealing with, which is the armless toll machines. You had an experience at the Verrazano Bridge, which is an MTA toll barrier. And the MTA tolls are one of the only ones left that actually have arms that require you to stop. And before you can proceed through it, you have to either pay or your Easy Pass has to be tagged. So they have collected the toll, the arm raises, and you're able to go through. Thruway no longer does that. Your high-speed tolls, the Port Authority tolls no longer do that. The Henry Hudson tolls no longer. They're all cashless tolls now. And what we're seeing is the prevalence of drivers not having the mechanism and just driving through, or hiding their license plates. As we all know, covering your license plate is already crime in New York State, but people still do it in an effort to avoid having their license plate captured by the camera that would then send them the notice of how much money you're supposed to pay. So that is what Senator Carlucci is trying to capture here. To make a point that in some places you almost can't avoid paying it, because if you were to stop at the Verrazano Bridge and you don't have an Easy Pass, you have to pay $16. If you don't have the $16, you are pulled over to the side, they issue you a ticket, and you will eventually pay. If you have an Easy Pass and it doesn't work, they will pull you to the side, you will pay the cash toll. But again, the MTA crossings are an aberration in our...
But in the context of an armless crossing, to Senator Savino's point, in the context of an armless crossing, the likelihood of this happening without intent goes way up, because there isn't an arm to go through. Yeah, I mean, here's the challenge, and because the point Senator Zolli makes, I actually am very sympathetic to. This is an important way to raise revenue, and by the way, every toll evador we know gets compensated for by raising the tolls. This is true on the Thruway, which is a major economic issue upstate. True on the Hudson River Crossings, a major issue of the economy downstate. When the tolls aren't paid, inevitably the tolls go up for everyone else who is following the rules. I actually agree with that. The problem is here the sponsor has piggybacked on a fare evasion structure as opposed to, I believe, writing something more targeted to this. I'm going to be without rec, and in fact I've been yes on the floor before in the context of we've got to do something and let's sit down with the assembly and figure something out. But I would strongly recommend, the problem here is piggybacking an existing fare evasion test that may not apply to the vehicle test. And so, that's that.
Perhaps, but you're right, something does have to be done, because as we move to cashless tolls more and more, and people continuously abuse them, there's going to be a tremendous amount of toll revenue lost. People are going to continue to, and why should anybody else pay?
And for people who aren't paying, racking up dollars doesn't matter. They're the ones not paying. I agree with
There
that.
has to be some penalty for that. I'm
Thank
going to vote for
Sorry,
it, but I
go ahead.
agree we do need to perhaps figure out what's the appropriate way to capture this type of identity.
Thank you for the debate. Motion is on Senator Carlucci's bill to report 2018. Negative votes? Bill's reported. 2055 by Senator Flanagan.
Senator, this is an act to amend the penal law in relation to vehicular assault and vehicular manslaughter.
Motion report. Negative votes? Bill's reported. 2087 by Senator Flanagan.
Senator, this is an act to amend the penal law in relation to penalties for causing serious physical injury, serious injuries, or death while knowingly operating a motor vehicle with a revoked or suspended license.
A very serious issue, one I am deeply concerned over. Motion report 2087. Negative votes, bills reported. 2099 by Senator Lavelle.
Senator, this is a amendment to the criminal procedure law in relation to bay constables in the city, town, or village in Senator Lavalle's district.
Motion to report. Senator
Without
Squadron, without recommendation. Senator Krueger, the negative, bills reported. 2173 by Senator Marcellino.
Senator, this is an act to amend the civil rights law in relation to privacy for people that use electronic toll fares, easy passes, about those organizations protecting their privacy.
Motion to report. Negative votes, bills reported. 2190 by Senator Squadron.
Senator, this is an act to amend the penal law in relation to expanding the definition of criminal trespass onto critical infrastructure.
Motion to report. Senator Squadron's measure. Negative votes, bills reported.
Won't speak for fear of ruining it.
Good. Bills reported. Get 2251 by Senator Larkin.
This is an act to amend the penal law related to the assault in the second-degree statute and protecting utility workers by that statute.
Motion to report. Negative votes. Senator Krueger in the negative. Bills reported. 2308 by Senator Klein.
This is an act to amend the penal law in relation to electronic stalking of minors and criminal impersonation by electronic communications.
Motion to report. Negative votes. Bills reported. 2491 by Senator Krueger.
Senator, this is an act to amend the penal law in relation to storage of weapons and weapon safety programs.
Just briefly on the bill, if I may, Senator. This is a bill that would create penalties for failing to keep your guns safely locked up if there were children in the home. There are too many reported cases of harm done to children who accidentally get access to their parents' guns. And I think that, frankly, it's common sense in this world to keep your guns locked up and away from your children. And, of course, there are the ongoing incidents of children accidentally shooting themselves, shooting each other, and, in fact, shooting the parents themselves. Any number of states have passed similar laws, and again, I see this as a common sense protection for children who live in homes with guns, or for children who might go visit homes with guns, even if they don't live in a home themselves.
Thank you, Senator Krueger. Senator Kruger, however well-intentioned this measure may be, that I believe it creates many more problems than you're anticipating or that you're discussing. That the issue of so-called safe storage is also an issue that could be very dangerous for those who are trying to protect their families from home invasion, from those who are having perpetrators come to the home. In effect, it keeps them safe as well, while the home owner, the gun owner, is in fact often stymied because of this. I've heard, certainly, again, I'm not suggesting your measure is not well-intentioned. What I'm suggesting is that it creates serious problems for those trying to protect their homes and their families. And I believe as such, I'm calling for myself a negative vote on this measure, and that the motion is to report. I'm voting in the negative. Let's call and show. Anyone else wish to speak? Senator Squadron, and then Senator Axar.
Thank you. I think it's a very wise measure. I think that there's a big difference between adults, those trained in firearm safety, and children. Access for children, often, you hear these stories where it's not even necessarily the child who lived in the home, but somebody else who was visiting, who might not be from a home where they're familiar with it. Also point out that among the many sort of careful and wise ways this bill is written, it provides an affirmative defense for the gun owner if they made reasonable efforts to retrieve or otherwise regain possession of a weapon prior to discharge. So, this is really not meant to criminalize conduct that's lawful and protected at all. It's meant to create a structure, both send a message and also create a structure that's safe, that is safer for children, both of gun owners and also those who may visit somebody else's home. So that's why it's a strong yes, and I think wherever you are kind of on some of the so-called gun issues, this one seems really important. So thank you.
Senator Axar.
I thank the sponsor. I think she's well-intended. I'll be voting no. You have some issues with the bill in terms of if accidents happen or lack of common sense is referred to. So
I'll be voting in the affirmative. In spite of best efforts, children, unfortunately, get into things that they're not supposed to, even with the most responsible gun owners. And I think we should always err on the side of caution. I can relate to the story. Both of my parents were still alive, and neither of them are. They would tell you of the time when my father owned weapons. He had a license to own them. He owned 2 bars in Queens, and he kept them in the home in spite of my mother's objection to them. She came out of the shower one day and found me playing with one of his guns. Luckily, it wasn't loaded, but it very well could have been. And after that, she was determined they would not be kept in the house. Those kind of things happen. You have to err on the side of caution. So I'm going to vote for it.
Thank you, Senator Savino. The motion is on Senator Kruger's measure 2491. Let's call the vote. Our clerk, Ms. Keel, would you please call the roll?
Senator, I have the proxies. Senator Lanza is in the negative. Senator Ashkar's here, but he's in the negative. Senator Boyle is in the negative. Senator Gallivan is in the negative. Senator Golden is in the negative. Senator Griffo is in the negative. Senator O'Mara is in the negative. And Senator Venditto is in the negative.
Senator Savino, would you please call the...
Sure. Senator, we have proxies for some other members. Senator Perkins is in the affirmative. Senator Hamilton in the affirmative. Senator Panapinto, aye without recommendation. And I'm in the affirmative.
measure is defeated. (2993) by Senator Young.
Senator, this is an act to amend the criminal procedure law in relation to permitting certain family members of a victim who was deceased to read statements in court during the sentencing.
Motion to report. Negative votes. Bills reported. 3083 by Senator Young. Senator Squadron. I'm sorry, let me have counsel read.
Senator, this is an act to amend the criminal procedure law in relation to the use of video monitoring equipment to conduct arraignments, video arraignments for in-custody defendants.
Motion to report. Senator Squadron.
Thank you very much. And this is a bill we've discussed in the past, so I point both to a floor debate last year and also an extensive committee debate. There are significant concerns raised, not just by myself, but by other members, about access to counsel in this sort of arraignment, and the free and unmediated and interaction with counsel for arraignments. It's completely unclear in this bill how that would be protected or assured, and that's an enormous issue. Secondly, obviously, arraignments do require some amount of judgment on the part of the judge, and want to be very careful about anything that might be prejudicial. We understand the issue here. There's probably a system, by the way. The fact of the video relationship to the arraignment is not the issue. The issue is creating that video without lots of protections for access to counsel and clear instructions to the judge about how to understand that video. For example, it's from a correctional institution.